with pumps, and Lett's gonna do CGM slash they're gonna bounce back and forth. So we'll have a little bit of discussion and then some hands-on. You get to touch some of the pumps. Perfect. Take it away, you can. All right, I'll turn the lights down.
So first and foremost, this is an overview, and I really kind of focused this on the differences of the different pumps you're gonna have your hands on most at keynote. Please, if you're not that familiar with pumps, make sure you do those Survey Monkeys. Go to each company's website, watch the different videos, it's super helpful. So this again is an overview, and like everybody has said, we have a lot of pump experts at camp, ask questions. It's not something that's just intuitively gonna come to you in 2 seconds, right? It takes a while, and we expect that, so don't be intimidated by them. Already having computers. There we go. So just as a visual picture for you, these are kind of some of the different pumps that you're probably gonna see at camp. So this is the new Omnipod Dash, and this is something that maybe even a lot of our our current staff has not seen yet because it just launched. So we launched April 25th. I've started several kiddos that I know are coming to camp, and I know there's some from the west side. You're probably not gonna see a ton of them, but you may see it, so we're gonna go over it. This is the original Omnipod system, so I work for Omnipod, and I'm like, oh, the old pump? Not supposed to say that, marketing doesn't like that. Because there's still, patients on it. So the technical term for this, trivia question, is Eros. So, tandem, the G6, obviously. We've got 630 and 670. I'm gonna talk about an easy way to identify what's what. You may, hopefully not, you may see some older Medtronic pumps, but there are some kids there. When I was at Writing on Insulin, I had a kiddo on one of these. Like, why are you still on this pump? But I mean, pumps aren't expensive, so they cost, a lot of money. And then Animas, we may still have some kiddos on Animas too. So there's lots of different devices out there, but you have lots of experts. You'll have somebody that can help you navigate if you're not familiar with that device. Just kind of summarizing what all pumps do. So regardless of the pump, what does a pump do? So a pump is delivering rapid-acting insulin from a reservoir or cartridge through an infusion set cannula that's going into the subcutaneous tissue. So whether they have an Omnipod or an Animas or a t:slim or a Medtronic, they're all doing that, right? They're delivering insulin into the subcutaneous tissue. And they're not delivering Lantus, right? They're not delivering a true background, what we call a basal insulin. The kiddo's getting that basal insulin from a basal rate in the pump. And pretty frequently they'll have different basal rates throughout the day, and that's their background insulin. All of the pumps have what we call smart calculators in them, that they're gonna use the patient's specific settings to calculate their insulin dose. So that pump is programmed. Their provider, their diabetes educator has worked with them, they've worked with it to figure out their VG targets, their carb ratios, their correction factor, their active insulin time. All of those things are in that pump to help calculate the precise doses. And then there's a little variation per system that we'll go through. All pumps keep track of insulin on board to prevent stacking, which is amazing. That's one of the best features about a pump, is it knows how much insulin, to some degree, is still working in the body. And so knowing on your team, on your kiddos, on the pumps, how to find insulin on board is going to be an important thing. So that's one of the tasks you do want to know. How do you want to pump? How do I find the insulin on board? How do I see how much insulin is still in this kid's system when I'm making a decision about what I'm going to do next for their treatment? And then probably the only downside of pumps would be that there is a slightly increased risk for DKA if they had a bad infusion site, if it wasn't managed properly, if they are running the same cartridge for 10 days and their insulin's really old. That stuff doesn't happen at camp. We have policy and procedure and antibody and Levemir to make sure that that's not happening at camp. We're changing that insulin out. They're getting free insulin, so they're not worried about it. People don't not intentionally change their infusion sites to be a pain in the butt. Insulin costs money, infusion sets cost money. It's habit, that type of thing. But at camp, where the policy is actually to change those infusion sites every 48 hours. So we'll kind of talk through that with your team leaders and with your kiddos. Make sure you know, when we check the kids in, we know, right? We ask them to put a new infusion set on the day of camp. And make sure you know when that was, when they're due for an infusion site change, and plan ahead for that. So if Susie is due to change her infusion site at 3 o'clock, but she wants to go swimming at 3 o'clock, coordinate with her in the morning. Look at that in the morning and say, let's do your infusion. You're due for one, let's do it before lunch, right? Kind of, you can negotiate with the kid throughout the day when you're gonna do that. Please try to avoid doing them right before bed if at all possible. Really, once you change an infusion site, you should be checking blood sugar after that, and so it's just makes them on that automatic blood sugar checklist. It's just not ideal to change them at night if you can avoid it. So here's something new we're kind of trying to educate staff on this year. So we talked a little bit about all of the things that those pumps are considering when it makes a recommendation for how much insulin to take. And so we want you to always start with that calculation the pump recommends. This is why I teach my patients. Always do what the pump recommends unless you know something the pump doesn't know. And then they look at me like, what are you talking about? So I talk them through, what does the pump know? It knows their blood sugar target, it knows their active insulin time, it knows their carb ratio, it knows their correction factor, it knows how much insulin they have on board, it knows how many carbs you entered, and it knows the current blood sugar. It's got a lot of data that it's using to put into its algorithm and do its calculations to make its decision on its dose. So what would we know that the pump doesn't know? The kid is gonna go run around like a crazy person and have the time of their life after lunch. So we would want to adjust that, right? They're feeling sick. They have been struggling with a bad infusion site. The pump doesn't know that. So always start with what the pump is recommending and make your adjustment from that. It's important too, and at the end, Kiwi's gonna walk you through how do you manually do the math to make a calculation. It's good to practice that, but on a pump, we don't want you doing the math and then just overriding the pump with your manual bolus. That kind of defeats the whole purpose. These providers have worked on these settings in these kids' pumps for a long time to try to tweak them and dial them in. And so make that your starting place and kind of adjust from there. And if you're consistently like a lot of highs and lows, then what we need to do, talk with your team leader. We need to maybe adjust those settings, right? If we have to turn them down, and there's gonna be some kids that the team leader is gonna make that decision on day one. This kid, I know somebody on my pink team, she loves books. She's the cutest little, most adorable thing. She wants to sit and read her book. She's gonna go nuts at camp and have fun. I'm gonna turn her basal rates down on day one, because if I don't, I know she's gonna go low. So we'll make some of those adjustments on day one, but just kind of keep that in mind. When you're doing that too, then work with your team leader to think through adjusting by percentages, not just by units. So some years I've heard or seen their blood, they're gonna go play after lunch, or they're gonna be really active after lunch, so just cut everybody down by a unit. Well, 1 unit from a 10 unit bolus is a 10% reduction, 1 unit from a 2 unit bolus is a 50% reduction. So just kind of think in those percentages, and that's how we always do it in clinics, and in teaching our patients to think through making those changes in percentage, a 20% reduction, a 10% reduction, a 50% reduction versus units. And if you need help to make adjustments at every single bolus, again, talk to your team leader about adjusting the overall settings. We can set camp profiles in a lot of these pumps so that it doesn't mess up their original settings. We can set another profile for camp just to use, so, okay, so, Kiwi gets to go first, because Tandem's the best pump. No, just kidding. I, as a diabetes educator, love all the pumps, and I feel like the best pump for the patient is the one that they and their doctor choose for them. However, I do work for Omnipod, and I'll try not to be too much of an Omnipod commercial. Monitor also works for Omnipod in Seattle, so you're gonna get double Omnipod, but anyways. So t:slim Basal IQ, just a couple things. How do you know that they have Basal IQ? They're gonna be wearing a G6, and you're gonna see the little diamond. We'll talk more on the next screen. Key things on this, it's a touch screen pump. and the wake up button, so it only has one manual button on top, the metal button on top that you'd push if it had actually timed out. A 1, 2, 3 will come up, you'd unlock it. Anywhere in the tandem pump as you're going through, if you want to go back to the main menu, the main screen, this is actually like your home button. It looks just like a logo on the screen. A lot of people don't realize that, but if you're trying just to go back to your status screen, right, you just tap the T. And so I did this just as and I do this because I've been in situations recently, camp type situations like day camps, where I've had writing on insulin and somebody's like, no, they have Tandem, they have Basal IQ. I'm like, they're wearing a G5, they don't have Basal IQ. So what is Basal IQ? It's a software program. Basal IQ is a software algorithm that's programmed into the t:slim X2 pump. We could potentially have some kids, right, that have a t:slim pump, but they don't have a G6 sensor yet, which looks like this. They've got a G5. Unfortunately, Medicare, Molina, some of those insurances won't pay for G6 yet. So if they have a t:slim and a G5, they can't run Basal IQ, and that's totally fine. You can still use that continuous glucose data to make decisions, but they're not talking to each other. So just kind of help to make that adjustment. And we put on the flow sheets this year for team leaders when you're checking people in, what is the kid running, right? And if they're with Medtronic, are they running in auto mode? If they're t:slim, are they running Basal IQ, or are they not running it? So again, like I mentioned, you'll look for the G6 sensor. If you see this little diamond, so they can have Basal IQ and not have it turned on. If it's not turned on, you won't see this little diamond. If it's turned on, you'll see that little diamond up there. If the lower half, excuse me, and so it'll be gray just if it's turned on. If the lower half is red like that, that means they're in a suspend at the moment. And then, why do we need to know all of this? We'll talk more about this. Hypoglycemia on a lot of these hybrid closed loop pumps is treated differently. We don't need to treat it as aggressively. They've already been suspended as we would with traditional injections or a pump that's not automatically suspending. So just things to keep in mind on some of these newer systems.
And Kiwi, some kids are gonna choose not to wear their CGMs at camp too,
Yes,
right?
exactly. So some kids are gonna choose not to have their CGM at camp. Simply if they lose a transmitter, it can be expensive to replace. Thanks, I got that.
Sorry, I forgot I called you Kiwi.
I was a cute.
I know.
So, how does Basal IQ work? What happens is that Dexcom is continually sending the blood sugar values to the pump, and Dexcom, Lynn's gonna talk more, Lovemir's gonna talk more about it in a few minutes. It's sending a new blood sugar every 5 minutes. So if it sends a blood sugar and that algorithm in the pump predicts that the blood sugar is gonna hit 80 milligrams or less in the next 30 minutes, or if the blood sugar is already low, then the pump's gonna suspend basal delivery. As soon as the next Dexcom data point is higher than that number, insulin delivery will resume. So we're gonna walk through an example here. And you'll see on the screen there, kind of those brownish red bars. When you're just looking at the screen, if you see that red bar there, that's a period of time they've been suspended. So if they're coming to you and you're evaluating a blood sugar and you see they've recently been suspended, that's just like good knowledge to think through, what do I want to do next? So just kind of here's some examples. So if their blood sugar is 160 with 2 arrows down, we'll talk more about what those arrows mean, but that means you could drop by as much as 100 points in the next 30 minutes, which would hit 80. The pump's gonna suspend. Next blood sugar is 147, it's still suspended. Next blood sugar is 121, it's still suspended. Next blood sugar is 124, the pump resumes. My arrow got moved. BG is 82 with a straight arrow, which means that their blood sugar is not really changing very much. The next blood sugar goes to 70, basal insulin delivery suspends. The next blood sugar is 61, we're still suspended. Next blood sugar is 74, and then basal resumes. So it's, and remind me, Kiwi, how often it can do that?
You can do that every 5 minutes.
So it can do it every 5 minutes.
before it'll change?
It's always evaluating 3 out of 4 points all
Right.
the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
each 5 minutes can turn it on or off.
Yeah, so this is simplified
Yeah.
explanation of it. There's a kind of a little more complex algorithm in the background. Don't tell my boss you heard me say this. But, I mean, I had kids that riding on insulin this year, which is a ski camp, and the kids that had basal IQ, they just kind of, they go, I mean, it kind of just helps level them out a little bit. It's a good system. And, people were wanting to override it. I'm like, no, let's just wait. They've been suspended for like 15 minutes. Like, let's just wait. You know, they're 1:15. I'm like, let's just wait. So, you'll kind of learn how to deal with that. So that very brief overview of basal IQ.
I don't know if we want to go into this much, but so if someone is low, they've got a 60 or something, and they have one of those, and you can see it's suspended. Are we gonna have sort of a camp protocol about how we treat those
Yes.
low people?
Yep.
Or do we ask the
Yep,
kids?
and Lev's gonna get into that.
Yeah, there's less carbs because of that, yeah.
Yeah, we kind of cut things in half, yeah, absolutely. So 630G versus 670. Hopefully you don't have a ton of people, on 630. 630 came out and was out for like 5 minutes and then they launched 670. And we don't work for Medtronic, no, I'm just kidding. It's a good
They're all
system.
good.
When I was at Rockwood Clinic, I trained a lot of patients on 670G. But 630G, you may see it. For me, the easiest way to identify is the 630 or 670 is to look at these buttons. If it has this little menu button, it's a 630. If it has this graph button, it's a 670. So that's kind of the easiest way at a glance to know, because I've seen people turn it over, MAs go to download it, they're like, what pump is this? That's just like really the easiest way to identify it. Okay, what is 670G? How much time you got? It is a very cool system. It does a lot of really great things, but it is a more complex system. Not even a lot of med staff, if they haven't done a lot of 670 trainings, like may be able to like right away jump in and problem solve, and they may go to Defib or me or Lev or somebody that's done a lot of, or Antibody that's done a lot of 670 or Titan. Right, to kind of ask those questions. But one of the things that I saw happen at camp last year was nobody knew what the kid was in. So auto mode is when the pump is running auto basal in the background. And auto mode is the goal of 670G. We want people in auto mode most of the time. That's kind of where they're supposed to be. You can tell they're in auto mode because they're gonna have a blue shield on the screen. Now, there's a lot of things you can do or do wrong that get you kicked out of auto mode. So if you're naughty and you don't follow the steps, boom, now you're on probation and you go to safe basal. Safe basal is a function where the pump is saying, I need more information from you to stay in auto mode, and until I get it, I'm not gonna use the data I'm getting. I'm gonna use an estimated average basal that I know is safe for you, and that's all I'm gonna deliver for the next 90 minutes until I get the information I need. If you don't clean up your act after 90 minutes, then you're kicked out to manual mode. And manual mode works like a basic pump. Manual mode works off of the pre-programmed carb ratios, correction factors, blood sugar targets, all of those things that are programmed into the pump. So you will have a kiddo at any given time moving through these things. There's also a couple reasons they can skip probation and get expelled. Like, no probation for you, you're out, right? And go straight from auto mode to manual mode. So just kind of know what mode they're in. If they're in this mode, we'll talk next slide what that
Hey,
means.
Kit Kat, one of the things you need to realize is if you get expelled totally out of auto mode, the suspend before low or suspend on low feature is turned off when they're put in auto mode. And so if you want to run them in manual mode, you have to go in and turn those back on.
Right, yeah, each time.
Each time.
Each time.
Yeah, each time.
Exactly. And so for most people, if they get kicked out, if they're wanting to be in auto mode, they get into manual mode and they do a finger stick, correct the problem, and they go back into auto mode. If they're like, I'm done with this, I just want to be in manual mode, then we want to make sure, like, reach out to one of your 670 people and say, okay, they're done with it for camp, they just want to do this, and we can make sure that those settings are set up for you. So what happens when they're in auto mode is that pump is constantly evaluating the sensor data. The Medtronic 670G works with the Medtronic sensor, which Lev will go over more, and it's constantly evaluating blood sugars to decide how much of a microbolus to give them in the background. So it's basically adjusting that basal insulin every few minutes based off of their blood sugar reading. On your graph screen, you can press that button and you can see up here all these little pink dots are what we call the microboluses. So then you can take this white line and you can move it up and down that graph, and it will tell you at the bottom. So if this was lined up over here, it might tell you how much of a microbolus they got at that particular point in time. Fewer pink dots means they're not getting any basal, so they probably are running low. A lot of pink dots, the pump's trying to crank out a lot of insulin, maybe because they didn't bolus soon enough for their food, or maybe they forgot to bolus. You cannot late bolus a 670G. If they want to be in auto mode, they have to bolus before they eat, or else they're just going to get kicked out. So a lot of information on the graph and the screen. Just know that that screen is there. If you're trying to problem solve a 670, that's usually where we're going to go, and then kind of walk you through some of that. Okay. If they get kicked out, they're going to be like, what's wrong? I'm like, I don't know. There's a way to tell. So if they get kicked out and you find them in safe basal or manual mode, a lot of times you will see a banner here. This is why you're in safe basal, a BG is required. They'll do the blood, they'll do the BG, they'll enter it, and they'll go back to auto mode. That is not necessarily always up there, and so there's another way. You go through the main menu to, you'll have menu maps at your tables, but you go to the auto mode readiness screen and it's gonna give you a checklist, right? This is like your system checklist. If it's green, they're good. If there's a ... it's waiting. So if they put a new sensor on, they're not gonna be in auto mode because the sensor hasn't warmed up yet. The sensor has a warm up period. If something isn't set properly, that's an action item. So you don't know why they're out of auto mode. They don't know why you go to auto mode readiness screen and it's gonna tell you. Okay. And then you take the steps necessary to get them back in. Kind of some of those differences over, like high level differences, auto mode versus manual mode. So basal rate in auto mode is those microboluses that are based off of sensor readings. Manual mode is pre-programmed basal rates. Food boluses, you can program a carb ratio in auto mode and they're gonna enter their carbs, that's how it's gonna calculate it. That's the same as manual mode. A correction bolus, you cannot do in 670. So the background system is supposed to take care of that. So if you, and that's like, we're all like, yeah. So if you enter a blood sugar into a kiddo in 670 that's over 150, the pump might recommend a correction bolus. It will tell you how much it wants you to give, and you can say yes or no. You cannot change the amount. So this is where people on 670 sometimes run into trouble because they're like, oh, no way, that's not enough insulin. I'm gonna tell the pump I'm eating carbs I'm not eating, so it gives me more insulin. And then that screws up the algorithm, and then we start over. But so you can't change. All you can change in auto mode is carb ratio and active insulin time. Those are the only two things you have to adjust. And it kind of makes you feel, you haven't done it before, and even if you have done it before, it makes you feel a little helpless, like, what do I do? In manual mode, it's just like a traditional bolus calculator. You can program those carb correction factors. Blood sugar target in auto mode, it's preset at 120. You cannot change that. That's what the algorithm is using. It's always giving basal to get them back down to 120. That's not an option. You're stuck with it. You can personalize that in manual mode. Active insulin time, you can obviously program, and you can change that. So your carb ratio and your active insulin time. You cannot set a temporary basal rate in a kiddo that's in auto mode. What you can do is set a temp target. And so you set a temp target and it raises this BG target of 120 up to 150 so that the background insulin backs off. I don't know how well that works at camp. with not being able to, if we ran into a lot of kids. My 670 kiddo at camp last year, she's like, I'm just gonna put it into manual mode and turn on the suspend before low, so.
We used it sometimes at night. I would tell
Yeah.
them to use it, attempt target if they were persistently low, so
Yeah.
it would back off.
But if it's like they're going, to play message for Garcia, that ain't gonna cut it.
Unless you start it early,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
How long can you run a temp targeting for?
12 hours.
12 hours. Yeah. Okay. So, just as a reminder, kind of then, these two automated systems where you have a Dexcom talking to the pump or another sensor, excuse me, Guardian sensor, talking to the pump and adjusting insulin, you may not need to treat hypoglycemia with as many carbs. So, know what pump they're wearing, know what mode they're in when you're considering that hypoglycemia treatment. And you likely don't need to override the system. Again, think through, what do I know that the pump doesn't know? And if you're like, I feel way out of my league here, go ask somebody. I work for Omnipod now. It's been a while since I've never trained on Basal IQ. That came out right after I left. But I haven't done a 670 in close to a year, and so, don't be afraid to ask questions. We're not, we expect that. Okay. Omnipod.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I just have one. Okay, so the safety mode, it goes into basals that are like the estimated average.
Yeah, so what happens?
Is that from like previous
Yes,
days?
yes.
Okay,
So
so
it
it
looks-
is matching the day of, the time of day, that's the
Yeah,
one.
so what it does is it looks at the last, is it
2 to 6 days total
Yeah,
daily
3 to
dose.
6 days of what auto basal has been giving them and calculates an average of it, and that's what it will deliver during that 90 minutes until, yeah.
So when they arrive at camp, the 2 to 6 days before was last week when they weren't at camp.
Yes.
Right,
Exactly, so that's.
awesome, great, thank you.
Which is why they should just be on the Omnipod or. So, Omnipod Arrows, it's not supposed to say the old pump, or Omnipod Dash. So, like I said, Dash recently just came out. I know of a few kiddos that have it. I don't think it'll be a huge amount. Monitor will be there too, so she knows all about Dash as well, and Omnipod. So, Omnipod is a tubeless pump. So they have a pod that's filled with insulin that they wear, and their PDM that controls it. At camp, the PDM stays with at the med table. The kids are not running around with their PDMs. Kind of some differences. So they're not hugely different, other than the way they look and function a little bit. The original Omnipod, it's a radio frequency connection to the pod. Dash is Bluetooth. Pod placement during activation. And you're gonna have resource guides at every table for your Omnipod kids. When they activate the pod, making sure it's in the tray on a flat surface, that's the same. With the original system, it's a little more persnickety. You want it right next to that PDM. With the Dash, it's not quite as persnickety. Oops, I did this at like 11 o'clock last night, so type those there. Battery in the PDM, Omnipod's your standard AAA batteries. Dash is a micro USB. So now we've got Tandem that needs to be charged and Dash that needs to be charged. Fully charged, it should last for 48 hours, but we teach our patients to just plug it in once a day. It charges really quick, like 15 minutes.
So do our kids charge at night? Are they gonna charge in their cabins at night?
So it's something that, and I'm kind of,
They can't just be with the tea table.
we don't have a policy for this on Dash yet. There's a few things on Dash I've thought of as I was preparing this, cause it's new to camp, that I'm gonna kind of put together and we'll give like a little update on that. But yeah, it should be, we should make a routine to charge them at a specific time each day.
Are we keeping those in match?
Yeah, CDMs would be nice.
The PDMs and Dash, yep.
I saw a really good idea last year, maybe it was Woody, did she leave? So she had was on a little guy's team, and every time before they went swimming, they would all come and drop their pumps off, and I think they would charge the Tandems at least, cause that one, same thing, you wanna charge it daily, it will last longer. But we wanna keep them charged daily. For the little guys, the older ones, they could charge in their cabins, and you just kind of keep an eye on it, but
Yeah.
those kind of things are kind of nice to
So
think about.
kind of a consideration for you, so with an Omnipod, the pod stays on you regardless, right? You swim with it, you bathe with it, it's on all the time. If you have a traditional tubed pump and you're gonna go swimming, you're gonna take that pump off and it's gonna be laying on the ground. The activity of all the exercise of swimming can lower blood sugar, but you're not getting insulin, and that can kind of balance out. So kind of think through with your podders, if they're going swimming, they may actually need a temporary basal rate. We may need to kind of turn them down a little bit, because they're gonna still be getting basal while they're swimming and being active. Versus somebody on a tube pump, the pump's gonna be off, now they're not getting insulin, that kind of balances that out. The PDM only needs to be within, so Insulet wouldn't commit to printing more than 5 feet with the dash, but I've had patients already tell me that they got like 10 to 12 feet out of it. So you just need to be within 5 feet of the kiddo to the pod to deliver a bolus or to check the status of what's going on with the pod. As soon as you see that it's delivering, they can take off. They don't have to stand there while it's delivering. You can deliver, as soon as you see it's delivering, they can take off, so they don't have to stand there with that. Yeah, there's other stuff, I'm not gonna get too far into the weeds. Kind of more just important everyday tips, I think. When we pull the pumps out, we'll kind of show you more, but on it, the pods look the same, right? So you're like, how do you tell the difference? A dash pod, so if you have a kid, like, and you go grab a pod and it won't activate, you might have the wrong pod. A dash pod is gonna have a blue needle guard on it, so blue for Bluetooth. The original Omnipod just has a clear needle guard. So just kind of know they are different, but this is the only way that they look different. Always deactivate a pod before removing it. So who's had a screaming pod at camp? Everybody?
Or at home.
So here's what happens. So if the pod runs out of insulin or it detects an occlusion, it's gonna sound a hazard alarm, and it's this horrible high pitched. And it'll go for days. It's a safety feature, right? If the kid's wearing it, they run out of insulin, you need to know about that. That's kind of an urgent issue. That rarely happens. What frequently happens is somebody takes a pod off without deactivating it. They set it aside. Now they go to activate the new pod. Granted, they can't activate the new pod without it looking for the old pod. So it's kind of saying, hey, you skipped a step. It's looking for the old pod, it can't find it. But there is an option just to discard the old pod, which makes sense, right? Because if the pod falls off and it's at the bottom of the lake, we need to be able to activate a new pod. So they'll discard the old pod, put a new one on, throw it in the garbage, go about their business. Now it's 2 in the morning and the pod in the garbage just ran out of insulin, it's gonna start screaming.
And the person's sleeping in May.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. So if you come across a screaming pod, you can kill it. You do not need to drown it, put it in the freezer, smash it with a hammer, none of that will work. What you do is you pull back the tape, and there is actually right next to the gold dot, you can see when you look at the pods closer, there is another, it doesn't look like you can put anything in there, you can use a pin, the fill needle, a paper clip, and you push hard through there, it breaks the soundboard and it will stop screaming, and you will be everybody's hero. So. And then just kind of another tip, I mean, it is really important, and this is more like with your kiddos. Like I've seen at camp in particular, the tables are tight, they're busy, they wanna go out and play with their friend, and they have their pod in their hand and they're trying to fill it, I'm like, dude, what are you doing? That's not gonna work. Keeping that pod on the flat surface when they fill it will prevent a lot of problems down the road and really decrease the chance that they're gonna have a pod failure. There's a lot of, there's a computer chip in there, right? There's checks and measures, and if that insulin's tipping around while they fill it, the pod's kind of like, maybe something's off, and it'll deactivate. Okay, Dash. Dash looks like a phone, which you'll see here. That's because it is a phone. So Insulet purchased this hardware, this phone platform from Samsung, and they made some great strides with software. They did not invest a lot of money into redesigning the PDM, or like changing the hardware or like coming up with their own hardware. So this is a temporary step for us. Next year when our closed loop launches, it's just gonna be controlled by an app on your phone. So Omnipod is going to get rid of the PDM and control the pod with an app on your phone, so this is kind of an interim step, but people will, and I did it too, I'm like, why don't these buttons work? Because they don't do it. They're completely non-functional. This will work as a back button, this is your on-off button, and then your volume button up there. Because it is a phone and that it's like an Android platform, it's very intuitive and people went through it. When I did all my DASH trainings with all the educators, I had to, like as soon as you pass it out, they just set it up, right? Like you don't need a lot of instruction on it, unless I have my clinical manager
Yeah.
writing
She
with
had a
me and
problem with that.
trying to keep you guys on track. You know, when I did it in Tri-Cities, I did everything and then I handed them out and they were like, done. Yeah, like, anyways, sorry, inside jokes there. So, there are, so DASH, you can set, 0 basal rates, you can do fractional carb ratios, those are things that are really more, significant to an adult population than peds, so I didn't kind of get into them. Just remember to charge the PDM daily. So there's an option in both of them, when you suspend an Omnipod, it'll ask you how long you want to suspend it for, and you can choose in half-hour increments up to 2 hours, 2.5 hours. In my mind, right, in a lot of minds, you think that means at the end of that, it's gonna turn back on. It does not. So, if you are suspending somebody because they're low and you're wanting it to turn back on, then I would recommend use a temporary basal rate of 0, which in Omnipod, you'll turn it down to 0 and then it will go off. So just turn it off for half an hour. Then it will automatically come back on. So a suspend is not automatically gonna come back on. At the end of the suspend, the PDM is gonna notify them. However, if you're on night rounds, you go into kiddo's cabin, you suspend them thinking this is gonna come back on in half an hour, you walk away with the PDM, their pod's gonna be beeping, but they're not gonna know why it's beeping until you get the PDM and get it inside the pod. So, and then this is the thing that I'm gonna kind of come up with a quick little policy fix for. So when you, just like on a phone, there's a 4-digit code, PIN. If you're checking in a kiddo with a DASH, my recommendation is that we write down that PIN on a sticker and just stick it on the back of the PDM. Worst case scenario, you can use the last 4 digits of the serial number on the PDM to unlock the pump screen, but at night, on night rounds, or if your eyes are just getting old like mine, you're not gonna be able to see that. So my recommendation is that we're gonna put a sticker on the back of the PDM with their PIN on it to be able to unlock it. So, and that's that lock feature is important, particularly with the little ones. I did a 5-year-old a week or so ago, and she was the cutest thing, and she's like, I'm doing it like she's a bright little girl. I'm like, Mom, you cannot let her have that PIN. Like she's terrible. Like, so keep it, if that's a risk, you know, go safe. Okay, so that's the end of pumps. Levamir's kind of gonna go over CGM, and then we're gonna pull out devices and let you guys get hands-on. There's not enough time, it's not the ideal environment for each of you to go through every single pump. Let us know what you need more of, let us know what you want more of. We'll coordinate with team leaders, even team leaders are not, that don't do these every day, are not familiar with these. So, Kiwi, myself, Levamir, Defib, we're here to kind of walk you through those specifics. And a lot of it is a learn as you go, right? I always tell my patients, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it. And I can vomit more information on you, it's not gonna do you any good. Like, find out in the heat of the moment, and it's gonna make more sense to you. So, right?
So I gotta pull my PowerPoint up, but in the meantime, I have packets, if you can pass it, of the PowerPoint so you can make notes, and what to do about the arrows.
I'm just like, yeah, I did this last week.
You know, 650 yes.
And a lot of this being KitKat tonight, we got the pumps and the sensors are getting more and more integrated and working with each other. So kind of all starts to meld together, really. You'll have to download all the comments here. Okay. So you can talk about, why this is trying to upload. Looking, KitKat was talking a little bit about the arrows, it's like, okay.
You're not up, your screen's not up. Did you wobble? What's that?
Oh, it's still just you. So if you're looking at those arrows, we were talking about, we're gonna be looking at the sensor, but in addition to a number, there's also an arrow. So they may get ready to go out for activity, or they are actually having a low. What is that number, and what is, really the arrow is almost telling me more information than that number sometimes. Because they could be 120 and having 2 arrows up, they're going to skyrocket, shortly. And it tells you about how fast per minute, milligrams per minute of points is gonna be changing over the next half hour. Or if they're 120 and have 2 arrows go down, and they just came in, so they're feeling low, I'm a little, actually quite anxious, that their blood sugar is 70 and they have 2 arrows going down. That means they're gonna be pretty low quickly. And so try to be what's nice about the arrows, you can be proactive. And say, they're coming to you and you're checking, well, if they have a sensor and it's going, that's gonna give you more information on, well, if they're 120 and they feel low, but they're going straight across, I'd probably say, well, let's just wait. You know, maybe you're just feeling anxious about something, you're really not even going low. That doesn't mean that they can't be going low, because they can often feel, you have type 1 diabetes, I can often tell even before the sensor is showing anything, that, okay, I'm gonna be going low. So they may come into you and feel like I'm going low, but the sensor isn't showing it yet. So just keep an eye on it, because, have them check back with you, it could be that, oh yeah, it's pretty down going low. So, but it's giving you an idea also on a percentage of changing your dosing. So, so on this one, is it knows if you have 2 arrows going up, it's gonna change 90 points in the next half hour. So you can change, if you're doing a correction, I'm just gonna add an extra 90 points to my correction. So I can be proactive and give that extra insulin before it actually bumps up. Or if they're going down, and instead of 15 grams of carbs, I'm gonna give them 30 because their blood sugar is 70 and they got 2 arrows going down. I'm just gonna right now give them the 30 grams instead of the 15. So it does help us with our decision making. Hang on, I got to see that.
It's not up on the screen.
I know, I have to get in just to, sorry. It's a process. Sorry. Yeah, it's not a progress that's necessarily want to go real fast.
While she's doing that,
Alright.
can you guys pass down your passports, put your names on them and pass them to me so I can collect them?